Long ago, before the world knew the country called Russia, the land was wild, cold, and divided. Endless forests stretched across the horizon. Huge rivers cut through open plains. Small tribes and scattered kingdoms fought one another for survival. No one could imagine that one day this harsh land would become the largest country on Earth. Today Russia is so large that it stretches across 11 time zones. From the small western enclave of Kaliningrad all the way to the distant eastern islands near the Pacific Ocean, the country covers more than 6 million square miles. It is even bigger than Canada, the second largest country in the world. But centuries ago, none of this existed. The story begins on the Great Plains of Eastern Europe. In ancient times, many different tribes wandered these lands. Horsemen rode across the grassy steppes. Traders traveled beside mighty rivers. Warriors came and went like storms. Tribes such as the Scythians, Huns, and Goths passed through the region, leaving behind stories of battle and conquest. Then, from the cold northern lands of Scandinavia, new travelers appeared. These men were Vikings. Most people remember the Vikings for attacking England and Western Europe, but many of them traveled east instead. They sailed across the Baltic Sea in long wooden ships and followed the rivers deep into unknown lands. They moved along the Volga, the Don, and the Dnieper rivers, trading, fighting, and exploring as they went. At first, the Vikings only visited these lands for trade and raids. But slowly, some of them began to stay. They built settlements beside the rivers and created towns that later became famous cities like Kiev and Novgorod. The Norse rulers became known as the Rus. Over time, the Rus mixed with the local Slavic people. They learned each other's languages, shared customs, and built stronger communities together. Little by little, scattered villages became powerful principalities. The first large Russian states began to rise from the forests and riverbanks. For a while, the lands of the Rus became rich through trade. Merchants traveled across rivers carrying fur, honey, silver, and fine goods from distant lands. Cities grew larger and wealthier. Life seemed peaceful. But far away in the east, a terrible storm was gathering. Across the endless plains of Asia rode the Mongols. Led by the descendants of Genghis Khan, the Mongols swept westward like thunder. Their armies moved faster than anyone had ever seen. City after city fell before them. Entire kingdoms disappeared beneath their horses' hooves. When the Mongols reached the lands of the Rus in the 13th century, fear spread everywhere. Some princes tried to resist, but the Mongol armies crushed them. Great cities were burned to the ground. In 1240, Kiev was destroyed in flames. Smoke covered the sky as people fled for their lives. Many Russian lands fell under Mongol control and became part of the Golden Horde. For nearly 200 years, Russian princes paid tribute to Mongol rulers. Yet even during this dark period, one small city quietly grew stronger. That city was Moscow. At first, Moscow was only a minor settlement hidden among forests. But its rulers were clever and patient. They worked with the Mongols when necessary, gathered wealth, and slowly expanded their influence. Then came a prince named Ivan III. Ivan dreamed of freeing the Russian lands from Mongol control forever. During his reign, Moscow grew more powerful than ever before. He conquered nearby rivals and united many Russian territories under his rule. By the beginning of the 16th century, a true Russian state had finally begun to emerge. But it was Ivan's grandson who would change Russia forever. His name was Ivan IV, though history remembers him as Ivan the Terrible. In 1547, Ivan crowned himself the first Tsar of all Russia. He expanded Russian territory southward and strengthened the power of the throne. But his greatest legacy was opening the path eastward into the unknown wilderness beyond the Ural Mountains. That land was called Siberia. Siberia was enormous, frozen, and mysterious. Thick forests stretched for thousands of miles. Rivers wider than seas crossed the land. Few Europeans had ever explored it. To conquer these distant lands, Russia relied on fierce horsemen known as the Cossacks. The Cossacks were brave fighters who lived on the frontier. Riding on horseback with weapons at their sides, they pushed farther and farther east into the wilderness. They crossed rivers, climbed mountains, and fought local Khanates along the way. One by one, Siberian territories fell under Russian control. The expansion happened with incredible speed. Within only 100 years, Russian explorers had crossed the entire width of northern Asia and reached the Pacific Ocean. For the first time, Russia touched the edge of the world. Soon explorers sailed even farther east. A Danish explorer named Vitus Bering, working for Russia, journeyed through icy seas near the Pacific. His expeditions helped reveal the coast of Alaska in the 18th century. Russian traders and fur hunters followed behind him, building settlements across the distant northern lands. Meanwhile, Russia's rulers also looked west toward Europe. At the time, Russia had very limited access to the sea. Much of the Baltic coast was controlled by Sweden, one of the strongest kingdoms in Europe. Russia needed a warm water port to trade with the outside world. Then came one of Russia's greatest rulers, Peter the Great. Peter was tall, energetic, and full of ambition. Unlike many rulers of his time, he traveled across Europe to study shipbuilding, science, and technology with his own eyes. He wanted to transform Russia into a modern European power. To achieve this dream, Peter fought a long war against Sweden known as the Great Northern War. After years of brutal fighting, Russia finally won. Peter gained territory along the Baltic Sea and founded a magnificent new capital city called St. Petersburg. Built beside the water, the city became Russia's window to Europe. Under Peter's rule, Russia changed rapidly. New armies were built. New schools opened. Western ideas spread across the empire. Russia was no longer a distant and isolated land. It had become one of Europe's great powers. Later, another powerful ruler continued Russia's rise. Her name was Catherine the Great. Catherine expanded Russian territory toward the Black Sea and defeated the Ottoman Empire in several wars. Under her rule, Russia gained Crimea and large parts of Eastern Europe. By the 19th century, the Russian Empire stretched across an enormous portion of the world. Then came one of the greatest tests in Russian history. In 1812, Napoleon Bonaparte invaded Russia with a massive army. The French marched deep into Russian territory and captured Moscow. But Russia's vast size became its greatest weapon. The distances were endless. Supplies ran out. Winter arrived with deadly cold. Snow covered the roads. Hunger and disease spread through Napoleon's army. Very few soldiers made it home. Russia had survived. As the 19th century continued, Russia expanded even farther into Central Asia and the Far East. In 1861, the city of Vladivostok was founded on the Pacific coast. Russia also controlled Alaska for a time before selling it to the United States in 1867. By then, the Russian Empire had become one of the largest empires in history. But beneath its power, problems were growing. Many people in Russia lived in poverty. The government was harsh and authoritarian. Revolutionary ideas spread through cities and villages alike. Then, during the chaos of the First World War, revolution finally exploded. In 1917, the Bolsheviks led by Vladimir Lenin seized power. Civil war followed, and millions suffered during years of violence and hunger. When the fighting ended, the old Russian Empire was gone. In its place stood the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union later became one of the most powerful nations in the world. During the World War II, Soviet forces helped defeat Nazi Germany after suffering terrible losses. Later, during the Cold War, Soviet influence spread across much of the globe. But the Soviet Union could not last forever. By the late 20th century, economic troubles and political unrest weakened the communist system. Finally, in 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed. Many new countries became independent, including Ukraine, Belarus, Kazakhstan, and others. Yet even after losing vast territories, modern Russia remained the largest country on Earth. Its story is one of explorers crossing frozen wilderness, warriors riding across endless plains, emperors building mighty cities, and revolutions changing the course of history. From scattered tribes and Viking settlements to the rise of Tsars and superpowers, Russia's journey became one of the greatest stories of expansion the world has ever seen.